right, let's go to Darren Dreger this morning. Dregs, where are you at right now, buddy?
Oh,
I'm in West Palm Beach for the NHL general managers meetings and doing you guys a solid, right? We're on location here, so I want you to see the palm trees. I want you to see the background.
God.
I want Ryan Rashog to see everything that he used to see, but he doesn't see anymore because this isn't his assignment. No, we've gone with the more experienced and the lower maintenance of Gino Retta the last few years here at the GM meetings. So Gino is just over there enjoying a nice lavish breakfast, and
nice.
Here we are. So that's
those
what I've got
those
going
are
on
real
to start.
palm trees behind. This is not a green screen in Ontario, right?
No. See, I can move.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
God, that looks nice. That looks nice. I love it. We'll talk about this with Rashog when he joins us.
I love it. Lower maintenance Gino Retta, though. That's a hell of a
that's a good thing to
play,
hear.
yeah.
That is a good thing to hear for sure. Drace, do you pack your golf clubs when you go to these GM meetings?
No.
No,
and everybody always asks that. I would say I'm in the category of an avid golfer. But if I'm going somewhere to play golf, I want to play golf, and I'm invested in the full golf experience. Like, to get the work done here by mid-afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then race to a golf course, and
you're not going to enjoy it.
No, not going to enjoy it as much. But I do know, I tease all the general managers. I'm one of the early guys up in the morning because the meetings start at 8. Maybe it's because as I get older, I get up earlier in the morning. It's weird, but so I'm down in the lobby at around 7:15, and some of the guys are strolling in, and I'm like, all right, well, meeting wraps at around 12:30. Then what are you doing? I haven't decided. Am I going golfing? Am I going fishing? What am I going to do? So, unfortunately, I don't partake, but I do. I admire and I appreciate those that do.
Well, let's start with where you're at then. What's on the agenda for these meetings?
Well, I mean, these are the tweaking meetings, to be fair. So it doesn't sound like there's going to be a whole lot of substance, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that, it's not like they're not talking about things that matter, but I think this is more spitballing and maybe looking at some of the other things that are already incorporated in the game, like video review, whether there's a tweak or something that they can do to enhance that. They always seem to talk about overtime, although I just had a conversation with somebody who told me that overtime games now are decided in almost 75% of the overtimes rather than the shootout. So that doesn't sound like any area that needs to be fixed. And I really think, fellas, that that's the state of the game. But from a business standpoint, there is some clarity that is required here. Now, we all know, and I don't want to bore our viewers and our listeners with this stuff, but we know that the NCAA has removed the restrictions, right? So CHL players can now flood in there and are. But when you look at the language of the collective bargaining agreement, for a CHL drafted player, that player has to sign his NHL deal within 2 years of being drafted, or he can go back into the draft. For the NCAA, it's a 4-year period. So these NHL general managers need clarity from the NHL. Okay, if the player is drafted in the CHL and remains unsigned, does that window expand to 4 years if he goes over to the NCAA? Or is it where you're drafted from? So clarity like that, business items like that will be discussed, but it doesn't really seem like there's going to be anything groundbreaking this week.
Just one more quick one on the meetings as well. I see the topic of scheduling coming up. Where do you think that kind of leads, or what avenues could that conversation take us down?
Well, you know what? It's all related to international play and how condensed the schedule already is. And if you look to next year, 25-26, I believe there will be 14 fewer calendar days available to the schedule makers. So what does that mean? That means that you're going to be playing a lot of back-to-back stretches where you're 4 or 5 games, believe it or not, in a 7-day sequence. So it gets pretty snug. It really does. And then you're looking at 26-27, and Pierre LeBrun touched on this as part of Insider Trading last week, the idea of an 84-game regular season as opposed to the current 82. And, the last thing people want is more regular season games. But I think what would happen is they would just shorten the preseason. So they'd take 2 games out of there and add them to the regular season. They might start in September of 26-27. And that sounds like good news if the Stanley Cup is going to be handed out early June. Well, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
they're just adding days so that it's less onerous on the players, right, and the teams and travel and all of those things. So to some degree, there'll be some scheduling matrices that are thrown out there for discussion. So yeah, it'll be discussed at some point.
Hockey insider Darren Dreger with us from the general manager meetings, brought to you by Pro-Am Sports. Dregs, the Oilers tight wins over the Islanders and Rangers over the weekend after starting a road trip 0-2. They desperately needed them, and the conversation would be, "Oh, are they back? Are they back?" But we had this exact same conversation last Monday. Then they lost to the Ducks. So, what do you think we need to see from this group to officially declare that they might actually be finding their game?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit more urgency for me, Dusty, to be fair, and the Oilers aren't alone in that category. It's just because they marched to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. Maybe many just thought that, okay, well, let's get to the regular season. There's not going to be anything that's shocking to this regular season. Get into the playoffs and watch this team run. But you do need to see a higher level of urgency overall in the Oilers game than I think what we've seen over a stretch. I think of the Toronto Maple Leafs as I say that out loud because that's exactly what the Maple Leafs are lacking, and they're supposed to be a contending team. But, we're often reminded, too, aren't we, that, the regular season is a cliche marathon. It's not a sprint. So you try and get through it as best you can. Sure, you can try and avoid matchups depending on where you finish. Winning the division always matters for home ice and your playoff opponent in round one and all of that. But for me and the coaches and the managers that I talk to, it is about the urgency and having that passion and that push from every part of your lineup. Your seventh defenseman, your 12th forward, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't always be on the shoulders of Leon Draisaitl, Connor McDavid, and the top-end players. So I think that's more of what they're hoping for and looking for is the consistency of that push this late in the regular season.
Darren, your thoughts on the Hart race right now and looking at it? Of course, we all see what Leon Draisaitl has done and continues to do with his point streak and the goals. Nathan MacKinnon right there, 2 points up on him for the lead. But Connor Hellebuck's really separated himself from the pack, right? So where do you kind of come out on these three guys in their pursuit of that trophy?
Yeah, I mean, they're all in that conversation, obviously. And I struggle at times when you look at positional players and the awards that already exist. Hellebuck's going to win the Vezina again. That shouldn't disqualify him from the Hart, and it doesn't. The Hart is most valuable to your team, and Connor Hellebuck is most valuable to the Winnipeg Jets. That's undeniable. And I remember we had McDavid and Draisaitl almost annually in this conversation. Yep. Edmonton has the luxury of having two of those guys, but Draisaitl has separated himself in that grouping for me a little bit. McKinnon, absolutely. Here's an interesting one. And probably because of injury and the games missed, it takes him fully out of the conversation. But you can put 5 guys on a ballot. That's what it's all about when you're into this major award voting. I'm going to think long and hard about Quinn Hughes of the Vancouver Canucks. Because if this guy had been healthy all season, perhaps had gone to the Four Nations, who knows? Maybe Team USA wins with a healthy Quinn Hughes. But I talked to enough former Norris Trophy winners, guys who pay close attention to the NHL on a nightly basis, who would make the case and argument that Quinn Hughes is arguably in that conversation of best player in the league. All right? Okay, so should he be penalized in conversations like this, because of injury? And I'm not so sure. So, the good news is we have a little bit more time to see how it plays out. But the guys that we've already talked about, Hellebuck, McKinnon, of course, Leon Draisaitl, most definitely are in that chat.
There's a tie in here with Hughes because I wanted to mention Vancouver because it looks like Pettersson's kind of getting going a bit, but then last night they let one slip away in a huge game against Utah.
Yeah, and so I think it was right around the trade deadline, and maybe you guys can pinpoint the day where Pettersson had that media availability and he took ownership of his own game, the stuff that's been going on. He just basically dove on the sword and said, I have to be better, but I am going to be better. And there was a sound of like convincing talk, appreciation for everything that he's been through, the struggles generally of the Vancouver Canucks. And I investigated that. And I don't think anyone around Vancouver is really sure what flipped the switch for Elias Pettersson. But the belief is that he did flip a switch. Right. And just the way he's communicating with players, around the dressing room, with the coaching staff, with management, with everyone around the organization. They need him to be a difference maker. Absolutely. I mean, the trade fodder and the conversation speculation, that's going to follow him into the offseason, perhaps until his no move kicks in on July 1st. But when you look at center ice in Vancouver, they don't have JT Miller. They weren't able to acquire a center, which they need. So obviously you need Pettersson to be at his best. So the games that they're playing now matter. And it is going to be interesting to see how this group can continue to bond and come together this late in the year.
Dregs, last one for you before we let you go, and that would be the race right now between Florida, Tampa, and Toronto. I mean, three
Messy.
big teams there. Florida's 4 points up right now, but I still think it's anybody's.
Yeah.
How do you think that sorts itself out?
Well, I mean, automatically I'm thinking as you're asking the question, Dusty, of the changes that the Florida Panthers made, and obviously they're dealing with adversity. It starts with injury, and then you've got the Aaron Ekblad 20-game suspension to throw into that mix. But we did last Thursday's game between Florida and Toronto, and that was a telling game because literally the division is up for grabs. And at that point, Toronto was right there to close the gap and potentially whatever the point grouping was there, maybe they could have jumped into first place. And they just, I talked about the urgency, lack thereof in Edmonton's game. Well, that's exactly where the Maple Leafs are right now. And it was a difference maker in Sam Bennett who took over that game for Florida. So Florida has so many different ways, given the Stanley Cup experience, that they can beat you. Tampa Bay, so many different ways. Again, that playoff experience matters. It matters deeply. Toronto's got to figure it out. They've got to figure it out. It sounds like for the Flames Leafs tonight that Craig Berube is going back to putting Marner and Matthews together again. He broke them up for a game against the Ottawa Senators, and that didn't go well. But the heat is starting to turn up in Toronto, and I can understand why.
As always, Dregs, we appreciate it, man. Go back. I don't know if you'd already had your breakfast. You're going to go finish your breakfast, or Gino Red is saving some for you. But you get back at it, okay?
Okay, fellas. Thank you. We'll talk to you next week.
That's Darren Dreger from the general manager meetings.
Gino, if there's something left, I'll have your toast.
A gig that Rashog used to have, but now we give it to Gino Red.
More experience,
Dreg's
more
coming
affordable.
in hot
I love
there,
it.
yeah.